This is episode number 159 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast, one of the shooting world's biggest gun talk programs. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, law enforcement, and the firearms industry. Before we get started, let's hear a quick word about our sponsor, the R7 Mako by Kimber. The R7 Mako is a high-capacity, polymer, striker-fired micro-compact from Kimber. With the R7 Mako, you get 12 and 14-round total capacity from the flush and extended magazines, while the performance carry trigger has the smooth pull and clean break you'd expect from a high-end single-action handgun. The R7 also comes optics ready, or you can have it with optics already installed. Kimber's R7 Mako will feed your appetite for something different. See how at r7mako.com. In today's episode, we're talking with my coworker, the editor of AmericanCop.com and Gunsite Academy instructor, Eric Gelhaus. Among the many hats he wears, he helps teach the team tactics course at Gunsite. But before you switch off the podcast because you're not a door kicker in the military or a SWAT cop, take just a couple of minutes to listen to Eric explain why it's just as important for everyday John and Jane citizen to have a basic understanding of how to work together in a critical situation. Now here's Eric Gelhaus discussing team tactics. Well, good evening, Eric.
Evening, Brett. How are you?
I'm glorious, and normally it's good morning or good afternoon, but we're doing this in the evening because you're out at Gunsite Academy right now, aren't you?
Yes, I am in beautiful, scenic Paulden, Arizona, where it was a whopping 16 degrees this morning.
How much?
16.
Wow. Okay, then I won't whine about the remnants of snow we've got around here. That's rather chilly.
Yes, it was.
Well, you're out there teaching right now. And the class you're teaching is called Team Tactics for Two, and I love the alliteration. You need to work in T and trumpets or something in there, but it's interesting when you talk to folks that maybe don't have quite as much experience in the shooting world. They're like, Team Tactics, that's just for SWAT, right? That's just for, you got a stack of 8 guys and they're going to take down the meth house. There's really no reason why normal Earth people would need to go to Team Tactics training. Is that right, Eric?
It's wrong, right? I back up. I understand why somebody might think that, right? It's not just for SWAT. It's not just for patrol. But who do you spend more of your life with than anybody else? Your significant other, your spouse, right? Some folks might spend that time with their business partner. Some might spend it with their travel partner. Like, hey, I always travel wherever in the world with this person. Or I always go hunting with this other person, right? So we're in the car, the truck, the motorhome for hours or days on end. I might want to know how they're going to react. I might want to know what they're going to do. I might want to work out stuff with them ahead of time.
I think you explained that perfectly after that slow pitch softball, because you're absolutely correct that if you spend a lot of time with folks, typically a spouse, but it could be anybody you spend a bunch of time with, it makes sense that if there's ever a serious crisis, a violent crisis, maybe you guys could work together as a team, and maybe that would help increase the odds in your favor.
And not just a violent crisis. If you've put the time and effort to learning to communicate about stuff on the front end, like, hey, if we're in a restaurant and something bad happens, how are we going to get out of here? Right? It will pay dividends on the back end because you're not trying to figure it out under stress while the reptile brain's trying to take over. Exactly.
And we've talked about that quite a bit. Communication is the key anytime there's more than uno.
Yes. So if you can get everyone on the same page, and you're going to do that through thinking about different scenarios, right? You can get on the same page once you start practicing. I need to trust my partner, right? One of the things I've seen in this class is, and I'm going to launch the shot at the husbands, but it can apply both ways. What I saw was husbands telling their wives not what the problem was, but how they needed to go about solving the problem. No.
I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I know. Trust your better half to solve the problem. Let your better half handle their half of things, right? As long as they're predictable. know that my partner's going to do X 99 times out of 100, right? Then I have some predictability and I can trust them. So we want to work towards the point where they're predictable and you trust them to solve their half of the problem.
And that's a great point, because thinking back to my own operational experience, and I know you've got even more than I do, that it's so important. It's critical that if you're in a situation, you got to trust the people you're with. And in the law enforcement world, you may not like those people, but you got to trust that they've got your back.
Yes.
You know, that's really the foundation bedrock of where this whole thing starts.
And even before we kind of get to that, I kind of bypassed something I wanted to touch on, which is like, why are you doing this kind of training? Why are you doing this practice with your partner? More resources, right? More awareness. There's a second set of eyes. There's a second set of ears. There's another brain involved. And if you haven't seen somebody go to panic mode under stress, or where the reptile brain takes over, if you got two brains working on solving a problem, that's somebody else that can help keep you calm. That's somebody else that can keep you in your rational mind. So the reptile, part that like, oh, I got to survive this, and starts doing weird stuff, doesn't take over, right? It can stay in the rational. You can stay in the rational brain longer if you got somebody who's helping you stay there, because you know they're going to help you solve the problem.
You know, that also prevents that other person from becoming a liability, because there's nothing worse in the middle of a situation where a second person just basically has a meltdown or freezes or does something really non-helpful. Now, if you got somebody working with you that they may not remember all the points in the great training by Eric Gelhaus, but at least you know they're not going to be running in circles, screaming or something.
Yeah, and now you add into it, so you're out with your spouse, your better half, and you've got kids or you've got grandkids with you. Now, instead of somebody who you have to take care of, in addition to taking care of the kids and the grandkids, you've got somebody with you who's trained up to a level where they can not only help you solve the problem, they can help you get the kids or grandkids out of that problem. And not everything's a gun problem. A lot of times it's just an awareness thing. You're out on a road trip with your partner, you pull into a gas station. One of you's going into the gas station to get Scooby snacks or hit the restroom, right? Now you're paying attention to what's going on, and you can give your partner, your spouse, travel companion, a heads up on things, or you're paying attention, like, hey, who's following my wife into the bathroom or towards the bathroom, right? Like, I need to pay attention to that. Likewise, your spouse can do the same. Your spouse or your partner can do the same thing for you. Hey, you got somebody following you. That's not terribly cool right now. Or people are paying way too much attention to my car. But if you've done the training and you've put in the work, right, there's that second set of eyeballs, that second set of ears that's helping you out with that problem. So
when you start the class like you just did on Monday, where do you begin after you kind of explain what you've just talked about of working together, the reasons for it, why it makes sense? And then now it's time to get down to brass tacks. Where do you start from there?
So with it being Gunsite, there's going to be some shooting involved. Right? The firearms part of it it's the tool to get to the end, which is teaching two people to work together, communicate, and solve problems. So they've already had a couple of pistol classes here before we get them in this class. We're going to make sure that they can shoot safely, so that then we can start taking the resources that they're devoting to the shooting problem to the thinking and communicating problem. We spend time in the classroom talking about examples of successes and failures. Then we take them down the range. We start on the shooting problem. Once we're pretty sure that everybody's got a good handle on safety and they can handle their target, then we start layering in how to talk to your partner, right? Where's the threat? Which direction we're moving? My problem solved. Okay, my partner's just told me their problem solved. Oh, I ran my gun dry. I got to talk to my partner about now picking up both sides of the problem while I get my gun back into action. Whoops, my partner's gun just stopped working. They've got to communicate to me so I can return the favor and cover everything. And then we start adding in movement. An example, one of the things we did yesterday was, okay, you're walking with your spouse, you're walking with your buddy, and a threat appears to one side or the other. How are you going to deal with that? Right? Yes, you're going to turn your head and look once you get the stimulus, be it movement, be it something you hear. But now what does the other partner do? You can't both make a left-hand turn at the same time, because you're going to be standing right behind them. or you're walking away, you're walking down a city street in a business district and something attracts your attention. Great. Ideally, you both turn outward. But what if you happen to be next to the building when that happens? So now one of you's going to turn outward, the other of you's going to turn the same way, but you're really turning in between the two of you. Have you considered that? Working problems along those lines as well. Right? And then we take them into the live file simulators down here at the shoot houses. We're letting them work the shoot houses dry with blue guns, just solid chunks of plastic that have been machined or molded to look like firearms, but you can't stick a magazine in, you can't pull the slide back. And then let them start working through the problems of dealing with doorways, dealing with rooms, dealing with corners and hallways while communicating with each other, while not pointing guns at each other inadvertently or intentionally, and working through all those things. Right? Just continuing to layer on, like, okay, we've hit this skill set. Let's work on the next one. Right? What direction are you going to move? What kind of discussions are you going to have? And we spend time talking about default response plans. Okay. So here's my general, say, six responses to stuff. Once we get those down, then we can start looking at contingencies. And if you're sports minded, and I grew up on the football team, I won't say I grew up playing football because I know where I spent a whole bunch of my game time and it was not on the field. But you call the play in the huddle. That's your plan. Right now you get up to the line of scrimmage and you realize that this thing is not going to work the way the defense is aligned or the offense is aligned. You call the audible, but the only reason you get away with calling that audible is you call the play in the huddle or you had a plan to begin with. Exactly. So we start working those. So
for folks that maybe don't understand this, you're not trying to make them into a SWAT operator here. This is not about dynamic room clearing and all that cool guy stuff. It really is real earth people in real life situations.
Yeah, this is that unexpected knock on the door at 10:30 at night on a Tuesday. Knowing that we're not going to walk up to the door and open it blindly, right? Knowing that one of us, if we even choose to go to the door, one of us is going to go to the door is going to stay closed. I know that my better half is going to have the phone with them and be back so that if, God forbid, something does happen, we are not both shoulder by shoulder standing in the doorway wondering what the bright light was. Mm-hmm. Right? But so at least you practice that, you know that your spouse is or is not comfortable being armed in this situation. And so their role is going to be to stand back and maybe be on the phone, or you're going to stand back in position to protect them while they go to the closed door because they're not opening it. Right? They go up to that closed door to have that communication, if anybody's even going to have that communication. Or you're going to the ATM, right? Because you're going shopping or whatever. Who's going to be the one to go to the ATM? Who's going to be the one to hang back and watch and keep an eye out? Or stand with your back to the ATM watching everything going on around you. It's like you said, it's not dynamic entry by SWAT. It's more just how do you communicate and solve these problems?
Talk about movement is a core piece of what you do here. And I know safety is even more fundamental when you're doing the movement.
Yes. So we have not done live fire in the shoot house. We have done live fire outdoor. We have done live fire around vehicles. We did that this afternoon, both from the vehicle and getting out of the vehicle. We do the shoot houses with non-lethal training ammunition. Specifically here, it's Simunitions FX marking cartridge around. Think a teeny tiny paintball moving at a pretty good speed. It's detergent and some color.
But they are ouchy if you haven't been shot by one.
Yes, if you catch it on bare skin or certain parts of the anatomy, it can be a tad bit uncomfortable. But we'll do force on force with them tomorrow when they're going up against living, thinking role players. But just today it was, in the house with Simunitions, FX rounds. So what are some of the issues, right? Knowing the ready positions to where you're not inadvertently running your muzzle across your partner. Knowing your partner's ready positions so that you're not stepping out in front of your partner's muzzle. Rule 2 is never let your muzzle cover anything you're not willing to destroy. Rule 2A is don't put yourself out in front of your partner's muzzle. You only get to that point if you've done the practicing and work. While the low ready is doctrinal, the Gunsite's traditional Gunsite ready position. In this class, because you're working around people in close proximity, other ready positions can come into play, right? We may have to have that muzzle averted to another position to make this work. If we're going through a doorway, who's going first is an issue. Who's lowering the muzzle to let the other person go first is an issue. How do we get to that? Those are some of the things we work.
So what are some of the most common mistakes that you see the students making?
One of the ones that I started out talking about, it's trusting your partner. So, and this bit me in a recent class where I was working with some folks I wasn't familiar with, trying to take on and clear more than your fair share. If you and I are clearing a doorway and we're coming from opposing sides, I just need to clear till 12 o'clock, right? If I start trying to clear 2, 3 o'clock into your side, right, I'm taking away your ability to help me solve the problems. And I'm also trying to take on more than I should. So first off, trusting your partner to take their area of responsibility. And I used the example of the husbands earlier because it's quite frankly who I saw it from. Not telling your partner what they're coming up against or what you're seeing that they're going to be encountering, but telling them how to solve the problem, right? I solve problems my way. My partner solve problems their way. As long as they're both acceptable and they're both safe and they're reasonable, I'm going to let my partner solve their problem their way. If I start trying to dictate to them how to solve it, now we run up against that natural human tendency of maybe I'm not terribly cool with somebody telling me how to do everything. We may have encountered that in our private lives. And during a crisis situation, that might not be the best way to work it, right?
That's not the time to have the discussion.
Yeah, you've got this issue going on to the left. There's your issue. Deal with it, right? I'll deal with my thing going on to my right. And we'll both come out the other end, and then we can argue about how we could have done it better. Because on the other end, you should at some point sit down and talk about how things went, regardless of what it was, and what you learned from it, what you should continue doing, and what you might want to think about fixing.
Yep. What are some of the other nuances of when folks are moving, working, communicating, and being safe? What are some of the other things you try to get them cognizant of? Communicate in ways that they can be heard.
Under stress, one of the things that kicks in with a whole bunch of folks, and it's on the far side of 70% on some studies I've seen, is auditory exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
The brain stops hearing things, or at least really turns the volume down on stuff that isn't relevant to your survival. So giving me a paragraph about what's going on isn't going to work. Telling me in 1 or 2 syllable words and not more than about 4 of them, danger area left 10 feet, is a whole lot easier for me than hear that, honey, if you look down on your side of the hallway, there's a door there and I can't see inside of it. So I'm not really sure I can't hear you. My brain I know under stress, my brain's not going to process that.
Yeah.
It processes danger area left 10 feet. Got it. Okay. I need to pay attention to something. So it's that. Processing what you're really seeing. So all of us have a habit of looking without seeing what's going on, right? What are you really seeing? What is actually a threat versus what is something that doesn't really matter? And then be able to work on that and convey it. Staying in the rational brain. And again, and we've talked about it, but the longer you can stay in the rational brain, the much better off you're going to be. Putting into action the plans. So it's great to kind of sit down, talk about, hey, if we encounter X, whatever X is, we're going to start out with me doing this and you doing that. Okay, well, now that you've got that, you need to put it into action and make sure you play it out. And then give it some repetitions to start going from that game trail in the woods to a hiking path, to a horse path, to a rural road, to a state route, to a highway, in terms of laying the neural pathway in the brain, right, to get you to that point.
And that discussion is so critical. I've talked about it before. I've had many of those similar discussions with my wife, my spouse, of that whole thing of, if we're here and this happens, I'm going to do this and I want you to do that. And what you're talking about is taking that even further, because again, the discussion is great, but unless you have that discussion continually, which would get really old, those things tend to be forgotten. But once you start actually practicing movement, discussing angles and things like that, that really builds that pathway so that, you know, some percentage of what you've discussed and learned to do will actually be retained in that moment when everything's going sideways.
And some of the things we've worked on to kind of reinforce that with the couples in the class are, all right, who holds whose hand? Does the wife hold the hand or does the husband hold the hand? Now we know that gentlemen should always walk on the outside between the spouse and the street, the lady of the street. But does that obstruct, block their gun sight? Does that take their gun hand out of it? What if your spouse carries a gun, but you're more comfortable carrying OC or pepper spray? How is that going to play out? Who's going to take the lead on stuff? And then letting the students have the opportunity to start putting some of that stuff into action and then run it. And once they've run it without variables, now we can start throwing variables at them in the scenarios.
Well, let's talk about some of the ways folks can practice this. I mean, the gold standard is to come to Gunsite and go to the Team Tactics for 2 course. But short of that, what can folks do in their day-to-day life to at least practice some of this? First,
start talking about what you're likely to encounter. What's the most likely thing you would encounter in your area based on what you're seeing in the newspaper, hearing about from your friends and neighbors? Is it knocks on the door at odd hours of the night? Or is it somebody trying to rob you while you're walking from your house to the Starbucks, a quarter mile away? Then once you kind of have some idea of what the most likely stuff's going on is, all right, how do we deal with it? How do we respond with it? Once we kind of get some ideas as to how we want to deal with it and respond, now you can start practicing it. When you're out walking the dog, just, okay, there's a corner up here, or I saw somebody weird who looked weird to me stepping into those bushes on the side of the road. What are we going to do? Are we going to keep walking right up to that bush, or are we going to step out into the bike lane? Not out into traffic, but out in the bike lane to give us some more space. If it's dusk or dawn, who's going to have the flashlight? Who's going to have the OC? Do I need to have a gun in my hand or have my hand near a gun at this? Talk it through. First, identify it. Talk it through. Then walk it through. You don't need to pull the gun when you're walking the dog, but we've all got those finger guns with us. Mm-hmm. Look at things that are coming up on the news. Look at things that are coming up. Sorry, not just on the news, but in the newspaper. What are you hearing about from your friends? YouTube is not a training facility.
What?
But there are some folks on YouTube who are using surveillance camera videos, business videos of events happening. You can take a look at those events and start thinking about how would we respond to this? What would we do in these circumstances? What's a good idea? If you have friends who are officers and they are knowledgeable about laws relating to use of force and violence, what can we do that won't cause us problems? Right? We can't always draw a gun and point it at the person who we're a little concerned about. Maybe we need to know what our local laws are, what our use of force laws. I haven't looked recently, but there was for quite a while a pretty good series of books on how to own a gun and stay out of prison in certain states. Maybe take a look at that, see what the legal ramifications, legal permissions are, and then factor that into what you have identified, walk through and talk through, or talk through and walk through. Every now and then, think about what's the worst thing that could possibly happen. Right? And out in California, where I still live, both in the San Francisco Bay Area and down in the greater LA area, there's a lot of follow-home robberies. Criminals are seeing folks with nice jewelry, nice cars, following them home, and as they're going from the garage into the house or from the driveway into the house, initiating a robbery and attacking them. Okay, well, how do you deal with that one? So identify it, talk through it, then walk through that response. And again, you don't have to go to guns in the neighborhood. You can at least go, okay, this is when I would consider drawing my gun. This is when I would move to cover.
Great advice. And there was a piece in there that I hadn't really thought about, but it makes so much sense using YouTube to watch some of these videos of how it goes down, because I'm sure you would agree with me in your career as a law enforcement officer. So many times when people are victimized, you hear something along the lines of, well, I didn't think it would be like this, or I didn't think it would happen this way. Normal earth people, thank goodness, don't understand what crime's like. They see it on TV. They see it in the movies. They think that's what happens. That's not how it works. It's very unexpected. It's very violent. It's a huge surprise. And if you watch some of that stuff on YouTube, you kind of get a feel for how these kind of predatory people operate. And at least it puts you in mind of how the process works and how you need to be thinking ahead of time so you're not completely behind in that famous OODA loop that we talk about so often.
Yes. The other thing too is start paying attention to what's going on around you. We've all got that little 4 by 6 inch box that seems to be surgically attached to one of our hands.
Yeah.
Because it's got all these apps on it that we want to use all the time. Get your head up out of that and pay attention. You're pulling up to the ATM. You don't need to be checking your instant messages. Maybe you need to see who's standing at the edge of the parking lot, at the edge of the shadows, and looking for that. And hey, honey, I'm going to hit the ATM, but would you keep an eye on that dude? Or, let's go to the next ATM about a half mile down the road. I don't like what I'm seeing.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, this is great advice. And before we go, talk about Gunsite and AmericanCop.com.
So Gunsite's the oldest private firearms training facility in at least the country. I think it's probably in the world. Jeff Cooper founded it in 1976 as a place to teach the modern technique of the pistol. The modern technique is not what it was in 1976. It's not what it was in 1990 when Greg Morrison wrote his book on it. It continues to evolve. We're updating things based on real-world feedback, real-world experience. We're on about 3,400 acres, and we have a wide variety of classes that involves firearms, empty hand skills, and edge weapon skills. And it's pistols, shotguns, carbines, rifles, hunting rifles. We do some great safari prep work out here. That's Gunsite.com.
And let me interject, that's Gunsite, SITE.com.
Thank you very much. As for AmericanCop.com, it's the practical application side of the Firearms Media Group. So, Brent, as most folks listening to this know, you're the editor at Guns Magazine. We've got our friend Tom over at American Handgunner. American Cop is online, not print. It focuses on both law enforcement and the prepared, lawfully armed citizen, or the prepared citizen who doesn't necessarily have access to firearms. Provides insights on training, practical application, gear selection. And we'd love to have you spend some time on the website, take a look at it, read what we've got there, and reach out to us if you got questions.
Very good. Well, Eric, I appreciate you taking time to talk about this pretty important topic and hopefully open the eyes of folks to realize why it's really important to work with your spouse, significant other, best friend, travel partner, or whomever that is that drives you crazy 24/7, but they're going to be the one probably first and foremost if something goes sideways. So, Eric, you've had a long day. You've had a long week. It's I hereby authorize you to have an adult beverage or two.
Thanks, Brent. It was a pleasure to be here again.
It's always great talking to Eric Gelhaus because he is so knowledgeable. And I would say, even if you don't head out to Gunsite for the team tactics course, you really need to talk to your partner or buddy about some of the concepts Eric discussed. If you enjoyed this episode, check out episode number 117 called Less Lethal for Earth People with self-defense expert Steve Tarani. Or you can download episode number 134, that's Active Shooter Survival with Roy Huntington. Or finally, episode number 148 is Exercise Safety for Women with Amy Robbins. If there's a topic you want to hear, someone you'd like us to interview, or you just want to share your thoughts, please drop me a line at editor@gunsmagazine.com. As always, you can find us on your favorite podcast directory, such as Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and several others, and also at YouTube and gunsmagazine.com. You can also subscribe to the Gun Cranks audio podcast on those same directories, or watch the Gun Cranks at youtube.com/guncranks. And finally, while you're online, don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com, AmericanCop.com, and our numerous special editions available for sale on our websites and at Amazon. And before we go, I want to remind you, don't forget to check out our sponsor, the R7 Mako by Kimber. Visit them at r7mako.com. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.